They didn't even try to whisper quietly. The words hit like a slap in the face, sharp and deliberate. "Why is she here?" I heard them from across the marble lobby, their voices carrying that particular brand of family cruelty, loud enough to wound, quiet enough to deny later. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked toward the elevator, each step echoing like a countdown to something they couldn't imagine. I hadn't stepped foot into that building in over a decade. Not since the last Christmas party where I was made to feel like an intruder at my own family's gathering. That night, my aunt handed out gifts to every cousin, skipping over me with a shrug and a dry, "Oh, must have forgotten yours." I was 15, old enough to feel the sting, too young to mask it with grace. Old enough to remember the way my cousin, Daniel, smirked when she said it, like forgetting me was the most natural thing in the world. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Sometimes the most painful moments find us when we least expect them, and I wonder if you felt this kind of invisible wound too. They always saw me as the outsider, the daughter of the one who left. My mother's choice to walk away from the family business, and by extension the family, was treated like a crime passed down genetically. I didn't belong, and they made sure I never forgot it. At every gathering, I was the ghost they had to acknowledge but wished they could ignore. At birthdays, weddings, and reunions, I was the one they barely greeted. My name often mispronounced, if spoken at all. They'd introduce my cousins with pride. "This is Daniel, our Harvard lawyer. This is Elise, heading up marketing." Then glance past me as if I were the hired help. I learned early how to carry silence like armor, how to swallow humiliation without choking, how to smile when my stomach was churning with shame. The whisper at the door on that day was nothing new. It was just louder because I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in their world, not in that boardroom, not on the day of the biggest announcement the company had made in years. They didn't know what was coming, but I did. I used to cry about it. At night, after the forced smiles and stiff hugs that felt like touching ice, I'd curl up in my childhood bedroom and ask my mother why they hated us so much. She never answered directly, just stroked my hair with fingers that still trembled from old wounds and said, "Some doors stay closed for a reason, Elena. Our work is to build better ones." Her voice always carried this quiet strength, like she'd already walked through the fire I was just beginning to feel. She'd left their world with nothing but her dignity and me, a toddler who didn't understand why suddenly there were no more family dinners, no more holiday cards with our names on them. She built our life from scratch, working 3 jobs to keep us afloat while they lived in mansions built on the company her father had started. So I studied, quietly, obsessed with excellence, not for their approval, but as proof that I was not what they said I was. I won scholarships they never asked about, took internships no one acknowledged, built networks in cities they mocked for being too liberal, too far, too different. While my cousins were handed internships at the family company like participation trophies, I was fighting for every opportunity in rooms where nobody knew my last name. The irony wasn't lost on me. They saw my mother's departure as abandonment, as weakness. But what they didn't understand was that walking away had been the bravest thing she could have done. She'd seen what that place did to people, how it turned family into competitors, love into leverage. She chose to raise me outside their poisonous bubble, where worth wasn't measured by your proximity to power. But I watched, from a distance. I read every press release from their family company, every quarterly report, every news article that mentioned their name. I followed the board changes, the acquisitions, the losses they tried to hide behind carefully worded statements. When the company faced a scandal that wiped out their reputation overnight, something about environmental violations and cover-ups that painted them as exactly the kind of corporate villains people love to hate, I recognized the opportunity. The scandal broke on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, their stock had plummeted 40%. By Friday, 3 board members had resigned, and Daniel was giving damage control interviews that only made things worse. He had his father's arrogance, but none of his cunning, stumbling over questions like a child caught stealing candy. I reached out to the one board member who had always remained on the fringe, the one no one listened to, my grandfather's oldest friend, Marcus Chen. He was the kind of man who remembered when handshakes meant something, when business was about building something lasting rather than extracting everything valuable and moving on. He remembered me. He remembered the girl who asked smart questions when everyone else was trying to look impressive, the girl who listened when adults spoke, who didn't interrupt or demand attention, who didn't flinch when told hard truths about the world and how it really worked. At family gatherings, before the Great Exile, I'd often find myself sitting with him while the others networked and schemed. He'd tell me stories about my grandfather, about the early days of the company when it meant something more than profit margins. Your grandfather would be ashamed, he told me during our first phone call after the scandal broke. His voice was gravelly with age, but sharp with conviction. This isn't what he built. This isn't what he wanted his legacy to become. Marcus gave me the opening. He introduced me to other board members who were disgusted with the current leadership, who saw the company spiraling toward irrelevance or worse. But they needed someone who could actually fix things, not just talk about fixing them. Someone with a vision and the skills to execute it. I spent 3 years rebuilding what they had broken. Quietly. Through a shell firm, I invested, advised, strategized. I brought in environmental consultants to clean up their mess, crisis management, experts to rebuild their reputation, and operational specialists to streamline their bloated bureaucracy. By the time the dust settled, I had rescued the company from itself, without them knowing whose hands had done the work. The transformation was remarkable. Stock prices recovered, and then exceeded their previous highs. The environmental issues were not just resolved, but turned into a competitive advantage as we became industry leaders in sustainable practices. Employee satisfaction improved dramatically as we eliminated the toxic culture that had festered under their leadership. And then, the vote came. Marcus had been building support quietly, one board member at a time. He showed them the numbers, the projections, the evidence of what competent leadership could accomplish. He didn't tell them who had been behind the turnaround, not yet. He just asked them to imagine what the company could become under someone who actually knew how to run it. The meeting was packed that morning. Executives in their expensive suits, checking their phones and making small talk about their weekend. Golf games. Board members who thought they were there to rubber stamp another cousin's promotion. Probably Daniel finally getting the CEO position he'd been promised since birth. Family members who treated board meetings like social events, gossiping about their latest acquisitions and vacation plans. And me. In a navy suit with no family crest, no insider smile, no borrowed legacy, just presence. I'd learned over the years how to command attention without demanding it, how to project confidence that came from competence rather than entitlement. I sat in the back, watching them file in with their assumptions and expectations, none of them imagining that their world was about to shift on its axis. My aunt glanced in my direction once, her face registering mild surprise before dismissing me entirely. She whispered something to her daughter that made them both laugh, probably wondering who had let the help into the boardroom. Daniel was holding court near the front, already acting like the CEO he assumed he was about to become. The irony was delicious. They'd spent so many years making me invisible that they'd lost the ability to see me at all. When the chairman tapped his glass and called for attention, the room hushed with expectation. They expected Daniel, or maybe Elise, who'd been making noise about gender equality and leadership lately, though she'd never shown particular interest in actually leading anything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been in boardrooms longer than most of them had been alive. "Today marks a new chapter for this company. After extensive deliberation and analysis of our options, The board has made a unanimous decision about our new leadership. Unanimous. That word hung in the air like a surprise nobody had seen coming. A few people shifted uncomfortably. They'd assumed this was a formality, not an actual decision. Point. We're proud to announce the appointment of our new CEO, Marcus continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. Someone who has already proven their ability to guide this company toward a more profitable and sustainable future. The silence was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, someone's nervous breathing. He turned toward me. Please welcome Ms. Elena Navarro. Silence. A full 5 seconds of silence before the whispers turned into stunned, choking gasps. Someone dropped a pen. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the marble chamber. Another executive adjusted his tie, suddenly too tight around his throat. My aunt's smile froze mid-lipstick, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock that would have been comical if it weren't so satisfying. One cousin actually muttered, "There must be some mistake." No mistake. I stood slowly, taking my time, letting the moment stretch like taffy. Every eye in the room was on me now, not looking through. Me, not past me, but directly at me for perhaps the first time in my adult life. I could feel their minds scrambling, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, trying to reconcile the girl they'd dismissed with the woman who now held their futures in her hands. My heels clicked against the marble like drum beats as I walked to the front. Each step was deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of every slight, every dismissal, every moment they'd made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere, let alone here. But I didn't look at them, not to punish, just because they were no longer the center of anything I needed. The walk to the podium felt both endless and instant. I could hear my mother's voice in my head. Grace under pressure, Elena. That's how we know who we really are. She'd taught me that dignity wasn't something that could be taken away. It was something you chose to wear, especially when others tried to strip it from you. I know some of you are surprised, I began, my voice steady and clear. I'd learned to project calm in hostile rooms, to speak with authority earned rather than inherited. But some of us were never waiting for permission. Only the right moment. Daniel's face had gone pale, then red, then a mottled combination of both. He looked like a child who'd just been told Santa wasn't real. Elise was frantically whispering to someone beside her, probably trying to figure out how this had happened, how they'd missed something so significant happening right under their noses. For those who don't know me well, I continued, letting that phrase land with all its implications. I'm Elena Navarro. Some of you remember me from family gatherings, though perhaps not as clearly as I remember you. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Good. I've spent the last 15 years building my career in corporate strategy and environmental management. The last 3 years, I've been working closely with this company's board to guide it through a period of necessary transformation. The pieces were clicking together now. I could see recognition dawning on faces around the room. The mysterious consultant who'd orchestrated their comeback, the strategic advisor whose recommendations had saved the company millions, the environmental expert who'd turned their biggest liability into their greatest strength. It had been me all along. Marcus stepped forward. Ms. Navarro's work has been instrumental in returning this company to profitability and rebuilding our reputation in the marketplace. Her strategic vision and operational expertise make her uniquely qualified to lead us into the future. This is ridiculous, my aunt finally found her voice. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. She's not even family anymore. Her mother walked away from all this. She chose not to be part of what we built, the room fell silent again. But this time, the quality of the silence was different. People were watching to see how I'd respond, whether I'd crumble under the familiar weight of their rejection, or whether I'd become something else entirely. I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a triumphant smirk, but something sadder and more knowing. You're absolutely right, Aunt Carmen. My mother did walk away. She walked away from a culture that valued blood over merit, politics over performance, and control over conscience. She walked away so I could learn what it meant to earn something rather than inherit it. I paused, letting that sink in. And now that lesson has brought me back. Not as the girl you remember, but as the woman this company needs. Carmen sat down hard, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She'd expected me to cower, to apologize, to somehow still be that 15-year-old girl who'd stood empty-handed while everyone else opened gifts. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to find strength in rejection, wisdom in exile. The board has entrusted me with the future of this company, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Not because of my last name, but despite it. Not because of family connections, but because of results. The environmental initiative that saved us $12 million and won us 3 industry awards? That was my strategy. The operational restructuring that increased efficiency by 30%? My recommendations. The crisis management that rebuilt our public trust. My team, my vision, my work. The numbers hit them like physical blows. They'd celebrated these successes, taken credit for the turnaround, never knowing that the architect of their salvation was the girl they'd spent decades teaching to feel worthless. Daniel finally found his voice. The board you can't just decide this without consulting the family. We have a say in who runs the company grandfather built. Actually, Marcus interjected smoothly, pulling out a folder thick with legal documents. According to the company bylaws and the shareholders' agreement your grandfather established, the board has full authority to select leadership based on qualifications and performance. Family relationship is not a requirement for the position, nor is it a guarantee of consideration. Marcus had done his homework. Every document was in order. Every procedure followed to the letter. They couldn't challenge this decision on legal grounds, and they certainly couldn't challenge it on merit. Your grandfather, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with memory, always said the company should be led by the person best equipped to serve its future, not its past. He believed in earned leadership, not inherited privilege. The irony was perfect. They'd spent years invoking my grandfather's memory to justify their own positions, but his actual words, his real values, supported exactly what was happening now. I looked around the room, taking in their faces one by one. Some looked angry, others confused. A few seemed almost relieved, as if they'd been waiting for someone to finally say what needed to be said, to do what needed to be done. I want to be clear about something, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to settle old scores or prove points about who was right or wrong 15 years ago. I'm here because this company has potential that's been squandered by leadership, that confused legacy with entitlement. I could see my mother in my mind, sitting in our tiny apartment all those years ago, working late into the night to make ends, meet while they lived in luxury built on the foundation her father had laid. She'd never spoken bitterly about them, never tried to poison me against them. She'd simply shown me through her actions what real strength looked like. Under my leadership, I continued, positions will be earned through performance, not inherited, through bloodlines. We'll invest in innovation, not just tradition. We'll build a company our founder would actually recognize, one that creates value for employees, customers, and communities, not just shareholders who happen to share a surname. The transformation in the room was palpable. The executives who weren't family looked intrigued, even hopeful. They'd been watching mediocrity get rewarded for years while their own contributions were overlooked. Some of the younger family members seemed curious rather than hostile. Maybe they were tired of the old ways too. But the core group, the ones who'd held power for so long they couldn't imagine life without it, looked like their world was ending. And in a way, it was. "This meeting is adjourned," Marcus announced. "Department heads, please plan to meet with Ms. Navarro individually over the next 2 weeks to discuss the transition. Human Resources will send out communication about the leadership change to all employees by end of business today." People began filing out slowly, some stopping to congratulate me with handshakes that felt genuinely warm, others hurrying past with their eyes down. The family members clustered together near the door, whispering furiously among themselves like they were planning a counterattack. As the room emptied, Marcus approached me with a slight smile. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "He always said you had his eyes, the ones that could see what others missed." After everyone left, I stood alone in the boardroom for a moment, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably at her small marketing firm, working on campaigns for local businesses, building something honest and sustainable. She'd never wanted this corporate empire, but she'd raised a daughter who could handle it. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Saw the news alert. Call me when you can. So proud of you, Mija." She'd known this day was coming. She'd probably known before I did. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and strategic planning sessions. I worked 18-hour days, not because I had to prove myself anymore, but because there was so much work to do. The company had been coasting on its reputation for years, avoiding necessary changes and difficult decisions. Some family members adapted quickly. Elise, despite her initial shock, proved to be genuinely talented at marketing, and was grateful for the chance to show what she could do without family politics clouding her performance. A few cousins in middle management positions stepped up and showed real leadership potential when given clear expectations and support. Others couldn't handle the new reality. Daniel submitted his resignation after 2 weeks, claiming he'd received a better offer from a competitor, though everyone knew he'd been quietly asked to leave after it became clear he had no interest in actually working for his position. My Aunt Carmen stopped speaking to me entirely, which honestly made family gatherings much more pleasant. The media attention was intense, but mostly positive. Business journals wrote about the dramatic leadership shakeup and the outsider who saved a family empire. They loved the narrative of the expelled daughter returning as the savior, though they got some of the details wrong. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the company's future rather than dwelling on past grievances. One reporter asked me directly, "How does it feel to prove wrong the family members who doubted you?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. It feels like coming home to a house that finally has room for who I actually am. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, the company posted its best quarterly results in over a decade. We'd launched 3 new sustainable product lines, expanded into 2 new markets, and won a major contract with a Fortune 500 company that specifically chose us because of our environmental commitment. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Employees reported higher job satisfaction, turnover dropped significantly, and we were attracting top talent from competitors. The company my grandfather had started was finally becoming the company he'd envisioned. Successful, sustainable, and built on merit rather than nepotism. At the company holiday party that year, I gave a speech to all our employees and their families. Looking out at the crowd, I saw faces that reflected the diversity of our city, our country, our world. We'd stopped hiring based on who you knew, and started hiring based on what you could contribute. A year ago, I told them. Some people wondered why I was here. Tonight, I think we all know the answer. We're here, all of us, because we believe in building something bigger than ourselves. We're here because we choose excellence over comfort, growth over stagnation, and merit over privilege. The applause was genuine, warm, lasting. These weren't people clapping because they had to, but because they believed in what we were building together. Later that night, As I was leaving the party, I passed the spot where I'd first heard those whispered words. Why is she here? The lobby looked the same. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, corporate portraits lining the walls. But everything had changed. My mother had been right, all those years ago. Some doors stay closed for a reason. Our work is to build better ones. They whispered, why is she here? Now they ask in silence how they never saw it coming, because the invisible often become inevitable.